Hello and welcome to Indus News. Live from Islamabad, I'm Naila Shuja and these are the headlines. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says a reset of ties with India is impossible until it reviews its decision of scrapping occupied Kashmir's autonomy. In a video message following a cabinet meeting, Qureshi said the government has deferred a decision to import sugar and cotton from India. In Afghanistan, a female police officer has been shot dead in the eastern city of Jalalabad. A spokesman for the police said she was on the way to her office when gunmen opened fire at her. This is the second attack against women in the city in a week, following the killing of 3 female polio workers on Tuesday. Britain has sanctioned a Myanmar conglomerate linked to the country's military over violence. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said the Myanmar military has sunk to a new low with the wanton killing of innocent people. It comes after 2 military-owned shopping malls were set on fire amid anti-coup protests in Yangon. Earlier, the UN Special Envoy warned of an imminent bloodbath because of the military's crackdown that has killed over 500 people. India has reported this year's highest 459 deaths from COVID-19 and over 72,000 infections overnight. In Pakistan, 98 people lost their lives to the virus and nearly 5,000 tested positive since yesterday. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia says COVID-19 vaccination will not be a prerequisite to perform the Umrah pilgrimage in Ramadan. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 2.8 million lives and infected over 128 million people. For more news and details, stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says a reset of ties with India is impossible until it reviews its decision of scrapping occupied Kashmir's autonomy. In a video message following a cabinet meeting, Qureshi said the government has deferred a decision to import sugar and cotton from India. The statement comes a day after the newly appointed finance minister announced that the country will import the commodities from India. Relations between the two arch rivals soured in August 2019 when India unilaterally scrapped the special status of occupied Kashmir. But a thaw was reached last month after the two neighbors agreed on strict observance of the 2003 ceasefire deal along the line of control. In India, 2 people have died in violence during the second phase of the voting in eastern West Bengal state election. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's BJP and Mamata Banerjee's Trinamool Congress are caught up in the fierce battle for the state. Hundreds of supporters of both parties clashed outside polling stations in Nandigram. Police said a worker for the Banerjee's party was hacked to death while 3 BJP supporters detained for questioning. They said a BJP worker also allegedly killed himself after he was threatened by the TMC supporters. In another district, West Mindapur, police said the BJP supporters raided a TMC camp, damaging their vehicles. The West Bengal polls are now being held over 8 phases amid tight security and conclude on the 29th of April. In Afghanistan, a female police officer has been shot dead in the eastern city of Jalalabad. A spokesman for the police said she was on the way to her office when gunmen opened fire at her. This is the second attack against women in the city in a week, following the killing of 3 female polio workers on Tuesday. A wave of assassinations has hit urban centers since peace talks began between the Taliban and the Afghan government last year in Doha. The government blames most targeted killings on the Taliban, who deny involvement. Fighting, meanwhile, continues in the war-torn country with 22 government soldiers in Maidan Wardak. They also claim to have shot down an Afghan military helicopter in Helmand, leaving 5 soldiers dead. But the government disputed the claim, saying 3 officials were killed when the helicopter made an emergency landing. Britain has sanctioned a Myanmar conglomerate linked to the country's military over violence. The Myanmar Economic Cooperation was curbed for making funds to the military. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said the Myanmar military has sunk to a new low with the wanton killing of innocent people. It comes after 2 military-owned shopping malls were set on fire amid anti-coup protests in Yangon. Earlier, the United Nations Special Envoy warned of an imminent bloodbath because of the military's crackdown that has killed over 500 people. Envoy Schrainer Bergener told the Security Council that Myanmar's military is not capable of managing the country. Yemen's Houthi rebels say they have attacked important and sensitive targets in the Saudi capital of Riyadh. In a statement, a Houthi spokesperson said they launched 4 drones which accurately hit the targets. There was no confirmation from the Saudi authorities. Escalation between Houthis and Saudi-led coalition has flared up in the recent months, despite international calls for a ceasefire. The Houthis have also rejected a peace initiative recently proposed by Saudi Arabia. The U.S. says it will continue to work with the UN and regional leaders to help bring about a sustainable ceasefire in Yemen. In a statement, State Department said the U.S. Special Envoy recently held productive meetings with Saudi, Omani, and Yemeni leaders. It said Tim Lenderking's discussions focused on inclusive political talks and durable peace agreement in Yemen. Washington said the Special Envoy also emphasized the need to address Yemen's humanitarian and economic crisis. The statement also welcomed Saudi Arabia's announcement to provide over $422 million for fuel products in Yemen. In Ethiopia, gunmen have killed 30 civilians and injured 15 others in an attack on a village in the western Oromia region. Witnesses said most of the victims belong to the ethnic Amhara community. Local authorities have blamed the attack on a splinter group from the opposition party, Oromo Liberation Front. But a spokesperson for the group has denied responsibility for the attack. The 2 neighboring regions of Amhara and Oromia share a border. Civilians from one ethnic group living on the other side of the border have been subject to attacks in recent months. In the U.S. state of California, 4 people, including a child, have been killed and 2 others wounded in a mass shooting at a business complex in Orange City. Police say the suspected shooter is among those injured. In a Facebook post, the police said no officers were injured in the shooting. They said the situation has been contained and there is no ongoing threat to the public. In a statement, California's Governor Gavin Newsom termed the incident horrifying and heartbreaking. This marks the 3rd mass shooting incident in the U.S. in the last 2 weeks. The United States and the Philippines have discussed their shared concerns on South China Sea. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan called his Philippines counterpart Hermogenes Esperon over the phone to discuss the matter. The White House says the 2 counterparts agreed to coordinate closely in responding to the challenges in South China Sea. Washington pledged support to Milana in upholding the rules-based international maritime order. This comes after the Philippines described the presence of Chinese boats in the Wutsun Reef as a threat. However, China denied the allegation, saying the boats were merely sheltering from rough seas. U.S. President Joe Biden's administration says it considers Israel's control of the West Bank as occupation. This comes after the release of the State Department's report that adopted language used by previous U.S. administration to downplay them. State Department spokesperson said the report on human rights used the term occupation in the context of the current status of the West Bank. In a press briefing, Ned Price said considering Israel's control as occupation is a long-standing position of previous administrations of both parties. The recent report continued with the previously changed format of naming section on Israel and occupied territories as Israel, West Bank, and Gaza. UN experts have expressed concern over reports of grave human rights abuses by the Russian-backed groups in Central African Republic. In a report, the UN experts highlighted Russian contractors' connections to violent attacks following national elections. The world body pointed out that the offenses include mass summary executions, arbitrary detentions, and torture. They said forced displacement of civilians, indiscriminate target of civilian facilities, and humanitarian workers were reported. The UN condemned the acts and called for accountability to achieve sustainable peace and stability in the country. Russia has warned its citizens against traveling to Georgia. It says it is dangerous. This comes after protesters took to the streets of Tbilisi against the arrival of a prominent Russian television presenter. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Russia condemns what it calls aggressive actions by extremist-minded nationalists. Peskov thanked the Georgian police for ensuring the presenter's security and the authorities for condemning the incident. Russian journalist Vladimir Posner's comments on Georgia's breakaway regions sparked angry demonstrations. The U.S. says it is concerned about recent escalations of Russian aggression in eastern Ukraine. The Pentagon says it reached out to Russia to get more clarity over the situation. Chiefs of staff of the Russian and U.S. militaries held a telephone call to discuss Russia-Ukraine border issue. Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby said the U.S. discussed concern about the increase in ceasefire violations. The call comes as Ukraine said Russia is building up armed forces near its borders in threat to the country's security. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken rang up his Ukrainian counterpart over the situation. He reaffirmed U.S. support for Ukraine in what he called the face of Russia's ongoing aggression in Donbass and Crimea. The U.S. says it will not be extending the license that authorizes transactions with 9 state-owned enterprises in Belarus. The U.S. State Department says the decision follows the deteriorated human rights situation in Belarus. In a press briefing, State Department spokesperson said Belarus has detained over 300 political prisoners. Ned Price said the violent tactics in the aftermath of the fraudulent 2020 presidential election in Belarus cannot be ignored. However, he said Washington's decision is reversible if Minsk takes necessary steps, specifically releasing all political prisoners. Price added the U.S. called for the cessation of violence by the authorities against the Belarusian people. India has reported this year's highest 459 deaths from COVID-19 and over 72,000 infections overnight. Brazil has yet again reported a record 3,869 daily COVID-19 deaths, pushing its toll over 321,000. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 2.8 million lives and infected over 128 million people. More on the coronavirus in this report.
Record high COVID-19 deaths and cases have got the world on the ropes again. While many countries are desperate for vaccine supply, about 15 million doses of Johnson & Johnson's have reportedly been ruined due to a factory error in the USA. New study shows the rates of stillbirth and maternal death rose by 1/3 during the pandemic, with the most acute impact in poor countries. Meanwhile, as Brazil struggles with record numbers of cases and deaths, President Jair Bolsonaro railed against restrictions.
Essa política entendo eu.
This policy of isolation, restrictive measures with a curfew, with the suppression of the right to come and go, goes far beyond even a state of siege. I appeal to all the authorities in Brazil to review this policy and allow the people to go to work.
Over in Europe, Ankara says the variant first detected in the UK now accounts for 75% of all cases in Turkey. Finland has ruled out stay-home orders, choosing constitutional liberties over extraordinary containment measures. Meanwhile, as third wave weighs down, Belgian hospitals have been ordered to reserve 60% of ICU beds for COVID patients. EU's drug regulator's chief says the agency is investigating 62 reports of blood clotting after using the AstraZeneca vaccine.
A causal link with the vaccine has not yet been proven, but it is possible and further analysis is still ongoing. According to the current scientific knowledge, there is no evidence that would support restricting the use of this vaccine in any population.
Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia says COVID-19 vaccination will not be a prerequisite to performing the Umrah pilgrimage in Ramadan. India has now opened up its inoculation program to people above 45. Meanwhile, Beijing International Airport has shipped over 1,100 tons of vaccines to 41 countries and regions.
Pakistan has recorded nearly 100 COVID-19 deaths overnight. Cases in the country continue to surge with nearly 5,000 people infected over the past 24 hours. The health ministry says the country's death toll has climbed to 14,530. The ministry said out of nearly 673,000 confirmed cases, over 605,000 have recovered. However, the number of active cases has shot up over 53,000. The country's positivity rate has also risen above 10%. It's now time for a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Slovak President Zuzana Kaputova has appointed Eduard Heger as the new prime minister, ending a month-long political crisis. Heger has taken over from his party chairman Igor Matovic, who has been made finance minister. The swap is aimed at quashing coalition disputes sparked by Matovic's purchase of the Russian coronavirus vaccine Sputnik V. Matovic recently ordered a shipment of the Russian COVID-19 vaccines his partners had opposed because they lacked clearance from the EU. Brazil has named new commanders of its armed forces on the anniversary of the 1964 military coup. This comes a day after President Jair Bolsonaro sacked the previous 3 chiefs over suspicion of a coup plot. Brazil's new defense minister Walter Braga Neto made the announcements in a news conference. Neto said Paulo Sergio Nogueira de Oliveira will take over the army, while Almir Garnier will take charge of the Navy and Carlos Almeida Baptista Jr. is the Air Force. Meanwhile, pro- and anti-Bolsonaro protests erupted across the country after he defended the coup and the 2 decades of dictatorship in his speech. In Kyrgyzstan, teams have gathered to participate in a local competition of Kok Buru, a game similar to polo, where a dead goat is used instead of a ball. Details in this report.
These are not the scenes of a medieval war movie, but of a competition of Kyrgyzstan's national sport Kok Buru. It is an ancient game quite similar to polo, where horsemen score points by throwing a headless goat carcass into the opponent's goal. Over 30 teams have gathered for a 3-day tournament of Kok Buru in the village of Sokoluk in Choy region of Kyrgyzstan.
As you can see, the traditional Kyrgyz game is going on. This winter we played games between different generations, villages and areas.
As one of Central Asia's most dangerous sports, Kok Buru is not for the faint-hearted. Not only does it require incredible strength and skills, but also courage. Athletes also keep themselves well protected, as they are just one slip away from a serious injury if they fall off their horse.
The goat weighs around 35 kilograms. When it absorbed mud, it got all 40 kilos. The soil is heavy and wet. The goat is heavy and hard to lift. Good luck to the other teams.
Kok Buru competitions nowadays are most usual for the Kyrgyz traditional festivals and the nomad games held on Lake Izkol in autumn.
European stocks are trading higher following the global trend as market attention focuses on a raft data release from the region. London's FTSE is leading the gains, rising over 0.5%. The Pan-European Stock 600 has also gained close to 0.5%. Italy's FTSE MIB, Frankfurt's DAX, and the CAC 40 in Paris have edged up marginally. Earlier, all Asian markets advanced over positive sentiment at the start of the second quarter. U.S. President Joe Biden has proposed a $2 trillion investment in the country's economy. The plan is aimed at improving the nation's infrastructure and shifting to greener energy over the next 8 years. The spending will increase the corporate tax rate to 28% from 21% and change the tax code to close loopholes. Speaking in Pittsburgh, Biden called the plan a once-in-a-generation investment in America. He said it will generate historic job and economic growth and help businesses to compete globally.
We have to move now, because I'm convinced that if we act now, in 50 years, people are going to look back and say, this was the moment that America won the future. What I'm proposing is a one-time capital investment of roughly $2 trillion in America's future.
In the World of Football Cup qualifiers, North Macedonia have stunned four-time world champions Germany 2-1 to hand their first home defeat in 20 years. Aljef Almaz's late goal from close range secured a shock win for his side, which is ranked 65 in the world. More in this report.
North Macedonia have moved into second place in Group J with 6 points, 3 behind leaders Armenia, who raced to the group top by beating Romania 3-2 to secure their third victory in 3 games. In Group D, reigning world champions France struggled to defeat Bosnia 1-0 to go 4 points clear on top. Antoine Griezmann netted his 35th goal for France with a header from Adrien Rabiot's cross on the hour. Meanwhile, Italy stretched their unbeaten run to 25 games with a 2-0 win over Lithuania. Stefano Sensi and Ciro Immobile netted 1 each to secure Italy's third win in Group C. Elsewhere, Spain dominated Kosovo 3-1 while England overcame Poland 2-1 in their respective group encounters.
Football's world governing body, FIFA, has announced the 9 cities to host the 2023 Women's World Cup. FIFA's president Gianni Infantino said Auckland will host the opening game, while Sydney will host the final. Infantino said both Australia and New Zealand will host one semi-final each. FIFA's president added the full schedule for the tournament will be announced later this year.
So the 9 host cities for the FIFA Women's World Cup Australia and New Zealand 2023 are, in alphabetic order, Adelaide, Auckland, Brisbane, Dunedin, Hamilton, Melbourne, Perth, Sydney, with 2 stadiums, and Wellington.
The tournament will be the first Women's World Cup to feature 32 teams. Moving on, in Chile, a kayaker used his canoe to descend down a mountain to land the world's first double kickflip over a waterfall. Details in this report.
A Spanish kayaker went to the next level while performing mind-blowing acrobatics on his watercraft to set up a new world record. Aniol Sarasoles took off to Chile to set up the ultimate natural obstacle course, featuring a 25-kilometer descent which forms part of the Villarrica volcano. He began descending down the snowy volcanic mountain using his canoe as a sled to reach a river in the dense forest. Sarasoles then navigated through the steep hill before landing the first ever double kickflip down a waterfall. In the course of his trajectory, Sarasoles sped up to 100 kilometers per hour. Earlier, he also overcame a crash during a practice run, which flung him 10 meters through the air.
In National Basketball Association, the Phoenix Suns beat visiting Chicago Bulls 121 to 116 points, with Devin Booker scoring a season-high 45 points. This marks the 4th consecutive victory for the Suns. More in this report.
Chris Paul contributed 19 points and 14 assists for the hosts, with Dario Saric scoring 16 points off the bench. Nikola Vucevic finished with 24 points for the Bulls, but could not prevent their fifth straight loss. Meanwhile, Brooklyn Nets rallied in the fourth quarter to down Houston Rockets 120 to 180 points. Kyrie Irving finished with 31 points with a season-high 12 assists for the Nets. In other fixtures, Minnesota Timberwolves barely as New York Knicks 102 to 101 points, while Milwaukee Bucks dominated the Los Angeles Lakers 112 to 97 to snap a three-game losing streak.
For the latest news updates, you can follow us on our social media at Indus.news.